My name is Jonathan Chesney, and I'm the Director of AI Products at HubSpot, a particular focus on Breeze Assistant. But I've been building AI products for about 3 years at this time. And over that time period, as many in this room will have witnessed, we've seen a real kind of change in momentum swings. So originally, there was so much excitement around the potential of generative AI until we got sick of seeing photographs of people with 7 fingers. Then we moved on to the excitement that the models moved at and how quickly they were evolving. But there's a sense that, will the models be able to be distinguishable? They're all getting so excellent. Would a person that is using the product be able to tell the difference? To what we're going to talk about today, which is like data might be the biggest distinguishing feature in some of the products you use and how you use it for your company. I'm very fortunate to have a great panel here to help untangle this. And of course, I could read out an AI summary of who they are, but some things are better done analog. So we'll kick off with introductions, just starting from...
All right, so my name is Thies. I'm very Dutch, if you can't hear from the accent. I spent 5.5 years at Google in different data and AI roles before joining Dawn Capital as head of tech, effectively building out the engineering team. We're a $2 billion European B2B software investor with companies like Neo4j, Dataiku, and Contexa. And we're one of the few firms that actually builds internally. So we built something called Rolodex, which essentially is a massive knowledge graph of all the people that we know, how those people would know, all the info we have on them, which has allowed us to build agents that help us prepare meetings and figure out how could we get to someone. And hey, Thies has a WhatsApp relationship with Anna, who is an angel investor in the company we're trying to get to.
Hi, I'm StJohn Deakins from DataSapien. I'm a serial founder with some exits. Came up with the whole idea of omnichannel kind of many years ago. DataSapien is about taking omnichannel and making it omnipersonal, using AI, which we embed onto customer devices. So make it very easy to embed personal AI agents and personal AI onto existing customer apps.
Chris Sanders, Global Head of Customer Intelligence Solutions at Contexa. Contexa is a British tech company, founded almost 10 years ago. Went through our Series F this year, valued at 2.6 billion, so growing pretty quickly, and nearly 900 people globally now. I've been lucky enough to be there for over 6 of those, almost 10 years. My role at Contexa, I head up our customer intelligence solutions, so I look after product strategy and all the applications of our platform in the sales, marketing, and customer service domains across all of the different industries that we serve.
Chris, we're going to keep you talking. Contexa turns fragmented customer data into contextual intelligence. In practice, what does that actually look like? And why is connected data more powerful than just clean data?
Yeah, so I guess if we start with that challenge of fragmented data, a lot of the organizations we work with are typically large enterprises across industries like banking, telco, insurance, government agencies. And they might have grown through acquisition. They might just have quite fragmented data ecosystems, which means they've got a very siloed view of the customers, the citizens that they're looking to drive insights around. That might be different product lines, different business units, mixture of internal data, external data, structured, unstructured, a lot of the challenges that I'm sure will resonate with a lot of people in the room. So the first challenge that our platform helps those companies solve is really the unification of that data. So if you've got Chris Sanders in one system, Christopher Sanders in another, Chris Elliott Sanders somewhere else, how do you know that's all one individual or actually 3 separate people? And if you don't know that, how can you make effective decisions about how to serve and engage that particular person? So we have something called entity resolution, which essentially helps provide that single view, that 360 view of all of the people, the businesses, the locations, the accounts, the emails, the phone numbers that exist across all of those disparate data sets. That's the unification step. The next point is around that context. And when we think about context, we're often thinking about the relationships that exist in that data. So you might have this 360 view of Chris, but what else can you understand about Chris based on some relationships and broader connections? For example, who do I share an address with? Am I associated with a particular company, and what's the profile of that company? Who are the investors of that company, as an example? And really about bringing more useful contextual information into the decisions that you're trying to make. And then the third element is then the intelligence, right? So you've got that nice connected view of data, internal, external, structured, unstructured. how do you start using that to drive insights aligned to particular business problems or user experiences? And that's where we apply different models across that contextual view, as well as helping to ground Gen AI and agentic systems in that rich fabric of connected data. So that's kind of the end-to-end from fragmented data through to that contextual intelligence.
Great. There's so much overlap with what you're saying and what Nicholas was presenting earlier on, and obviously we're going to go into a bit more detail on that and the opportunity there is. StJohn, you're approaching this challenge from the other side, so keeping data decentralized. Hopefully, you can still both be friends. How does on-device AI make interoperability and trust possible without centralization?
So it's not kind of centralized data versus on the edge, right? It's kind of, so you need a proper CRM customer data platform. HubSpot's a great one, for example. And what that gives you is all of your history with prospects and with customers. And that should give you kind of deep, rich information about kind of where your customers are, where they've been, your kind of previous interactions, kind of should give you deep intel, especially with the new AI announcements this morning, kind of about kind of the context of the organization and those individuals historically. The beautiful thing about understanding someone in the moment is that you can drive massive engagement uplift. So you have your centralized data history, but where your consumer customers are is in their individual moment is basically informable by the data from the device. So you've got lots of live stream data coming from many, many apps. You might have a shopping grocery loyalty app where you can basically pull in things like Apple Health Kit as a customer, and that can basically drive an outcome for me as in terms of my nutrition needs for me and my family. And that data isn't available, obviously, in the CRM. By enabling customers to participate with that data, you can basically massively uplift the engagement. We've got some Amazon stats we're looking at with 44x increase in engagement by understanding where people are in context. So understanding where they are in their life moment, and then using omnipersonal to kind of join up those life moments. Rather, omnichannel is more about coordinating channels. Yeah.
Great. And do you see that the end users are more cautious about their data now that we've been through 20 years of understanding how data can be used and how readily we give it away? Is there
there's this kind of privacy paradox, which a lot of people talk about, and we've all been through GDPR for the last 10 years, and I've had the pleasure of presenting at the ICO conference with 800 compliance officers kind of ticking as I do my presentation. The reality is that basically people don't buy privacy. People expect privacy and security and a fair deal as part of their brand relationship, right? We all may complain about or can be concerned about privacy, and survey after survey will say 69, 70% of people are worried about privacy, but the reality is we want personalization. And until now, we've had this paradox of kind of trading off compliance and privacy and security with personalization. And if you move the AI to the device where the data is, instead of trying to move all the data to a central server, you massively unlock personalization, and you have a much more secure environment, effectively getting your customers to participate with their data to drive outcomes that they need, kind of jobs to be done type frameworks.
Yeah. Chris, has he changed your mind yet?
I think that hybrid model is the way to go, right? There's some data that it makes sense to centralize, there's others that should live at the edge, and I think your comments there, we often talk about this value exchange where customers need to feel like they're getting something back for sharing that data, exactly. And that personalization, those meaningful moments is the way to do that.
Exactly.
We've seen that any new tech evolution brings a lot of opportunity, maybe as much for startups than the big companies. It's as much of a threat to a big company as it is an opportunity. We saw that working in mobile, social moved so fast in terms of what it did to media companies, traditional media providers. Thijs, you're in that space at Dunn Capital, working with early-stage data platforms. How are these startups designing differently from the incumbents?
There's one big risk as a startup, and I think one thing that's hugely exciting. So as most of my engineering time has been spent as a data engineer, and as you go deeper, especially at a big company like Google, you actually realize how sort of useless you are, because you can only do a very, very, very small, wedge. And for anything else, you need to bring in people. These days, as a data engineer, you can imagine how beautiful my front-end skills are, right? It's not great. What you can do these days with Claude Code and with Lovable and with Cursor, you can attack domains like a front end or build some LLM agent, or you can be much more adventurous. So I think the best startups that we see have phenomenal engineering talent, whether it's in data or otherwise, and they're willing to go beyond either data, or if you're a software engineer, they're willing to go into the data bit much more. I think the big risk now that, especially compared to enterprise, is even at Google, it would take like a meeting, for a review, for a meeting, for a prep doc, for a meeting to then align on what we're going to build. At a startup, if you do that twice, you're out of runway and you're dead. So I think you just need to be extremely focused, and the best startups we have in our portfolio are extremely focused. Like on TechServer, they're great at saying no to many things, and they're really good at figuring out what do people actually want and need and what's going to move the needle, versus just building what the most politically savvy person wants or the person that's shouting the loudest wants to build.
What else can enterprises learn from that agility? You mentioned that there's just some things that are introduced into big companies to try to have alignment, but really it's at the cost of speed and agility. So any other tips?
I think one of the things that, this is not a practice across Google, but the best engineering team I worked with at Google, one thing they did is once a quarter, they would get all the stakeholders in one room. Everyone would get physical 100 Monopoly dollars. As an engineering team, we sketched out the 5 or 8 initiatives that either we'd come up with or we'd heard from the industry. And then people could vote with their dollars. So they could say, look, there's 5 projects. Actually, the only thing I really want you to ship this quarter is X, and I don't care about the rest. And I think the challenge, if you don't do this, is you get pulled in all different directions. And if you just ask people to rank, you lose the difference between priority 1 and priority 2. Because it's possible that actually, as long as you ship 1, I don't care where you go on holiday, you know? The whole team can go on holiday, I don't care. So this has been extremely useful for us to also then let other people sort of fight it out or discuss. Whereas otherwise, as an engineering team, you come across a bit like people that just say no if you try to prioritize. So this, I think, is the biggest tip. And I do this internally at Dawn. We do this internally at a bunch of portfolio companies and, yeah, at enterprise.
I think that's super interesting that there's so much opportunity and excitement and urgency around what can be done that can almost cause a bit of paralysis. Like, you know, you walk into an Apple store 10 years ago and the question was, which of these 4 products do you want? There's a certain advantage to not having much choice, and AI has created a lot of choice. Which kind of brings us on to where we believe the bottleneck is no longer about innovation or what can be done. It's about integration. And again, this came up on Nicholas's presentation earlier. What are you seeing as the biggest blockers to connecting data in ways that can drive real valuable business outcomes?
So the fascinating thing, I mean, it's kind of an old adage for data science, is that 80% of the job is basically kind of in clearing up and tidying up data, right? For consumer data, if you can organize that data so it comes in from the consumer's own device in a taxonomy that's already been set, and it's matched against your existing in-house taxonomy, it means your data ingestion pipes coming into your data environment, basically all the data is clean at source. So when you then ask customers whether they'd like to share some of that data off their device as zero-party data, you've got everything already kind of clean and mapped. And what's better than that is on device, with AI running on device, you can run things like segmentations locally on device. So you can also segment off things like, you know, app usage on device to work out who customers are, and you can do that at initiation. As soon as your app is fired up by the customer, that then basically drives kind of inference on top, and all of that can be shared as zero-party data back into the center, which means you then have kind of clean data from the start to then train your models to deploy back out. So that is a massive paradigm shift, because we've spent the last 30 years thinking central mainframe. We've kind of gone through this mobile shift, but we haven't done the same thing for AI yet, and that's the kind of the big thing that's going to come through in 2026, is moving out to the edge. Simple reason for that, just very quickly, in terms of cost. If you look at Salesforce, their cost per agent interaction is 10 cents. Putting an SDK on device, which is running its own AI, you could do 10 cents a year at volume for thousands of interactions a year. So the cost dynamics as well just don't stack up for sending everything off to OpenAI when it comes to customer interaction. For your core HubSpot CRM, it makes sense. But for the customer interaction, just shift everything out to the edge and use customer compute. So you save on cost and then also have this beautiful data benefit as well.
You're going to get a lot of people's attention when you talk about saving on cost in AI because those numbers are exploding.
I've heard some great, we partner with some big consultancy companies and some of the, if you're doing fixed cost AI, you've got a problem.
Right.
Right.
And it's got to be paid for by somebody at some point.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think just adding a bit of flavor to some of those integration challenges as well, there's obviously that kind of data and technology component, and I think the ability to integrate different systems has accelerated rapidly, particularly in the agentic world with MCPs and A2A and all of that sort of stuff. But I think there's still some kind of more macro challenges and business challenges from an organizational and governance perspective that are still limiting a lot of that integration as well. So even thinking about, at a more macro level, things like data sovereignty and residency and what that means in terms of connecting data across different markets suddenly becomes really difficult. When you've got different business silos that have their own objectives and agendas and don't want to share data with one another, we see a lot of friction in that space, more from an organizational construct, and even down to the system level, right, where you've got a marketing team looking after the marketing automation platform, a separate CRM team owning the CRM system, all with their own roadmaps, their own KPIs, and getting those teams to work together more holistically to achieve those business goals remains a challenge, I think.
A lot of your customers would be banks, which is obviously a lot of data, a lot of legacy systems. How do you find that enterprises are still underestimating the kind of foundational data and organizational work required before you even start seeing the return on that investment?
Yeah.
Are these easy conversations to have?
I think I wouldn't even necessarily call it underestimation from a foundational data perspective, because I think very quickly, once the kind of AI boom started, if we call it that, banks and other large enterprises very quickly realized that they needed to get their data in order. And they were already doing so, right? But they had to accelerate a lot of that to make sure they could maximize the value out of AI. But I think even though they're not necessarily underestimating it, there's still a lot of complex challenges that they're facing. I think in particular, some of the privacy and security and data control challenges. So, we're working with banks who are trying to roll out agentic solutions to 15,000 relationship managers in the front office. And each of those relationship managers has got access to different customers in different kind of teams. They've got access to different markets, different products, different industries. And how do you dynamically adhere to all that through this quite complex agentic system? So there's some real crunchy challenges coming through from that perspective. And I think, more broadly, that model governance, it wasn't that long ago where model governance was all logistic regressions and quite transparent variables that you could easily track in a very deterministic way. And all of a sudden you've got LLMs testing LLMs, and how do model governance kind of keep up to speed with that and become comfortable with that? And then you've got the broader regulation that's moving really quickly and is super fragmented as well. So I think, I saw a count recently, there was 69 different countries and over 1,000 different AI policies and governance frameworks around AI safety. And how, as a global bank or a global enterprise, do you keep abreast of all of that and make sure that you're compliant? So
I'm hoping you're working with my bank now. They kind of need it. So.
I want to keep pushing on this. So Ty's talked about the difference in the startups he sees and how they can adapt and work maybe faster than a Google for obvious reasons. But you're definitely in a space which is like not just the speed of innovation, but the amount of extra responsibilities in governments. So in a very regulated industry, is compliance always going to be a drag on innovation? Or have you seen the teams you work with turn that into some sort of an advantage?
In some instances, we've even seen the opposite, right? Sometimes the compliance departments have actually, maybe got regulators stick over the head, and they're forced to make fairly significant investments to innovate in data, to make better use of data, to remain compliant or become compliant. So sometimes the investments they make in that world can actually then become an advantage in more of a commercial sense as well. So, there's classic examples. The Quantexa platform, yes, we use it for sales, marketing, customer service, but also for things like anti-money laundering and fraud. So where banks have started in that anti-money laundering space, built this really rich contextual view of customers paying one another, businesses, people, customers, non-customers, counterparties, all of that world. And then the commercial teams have seen that, and they've said, wow, you've got a much better view of these customers than we've ever had in the business. How can we take advantage of that and actually use it to start prospecting, growing the business, engaging our customers? So there's some real examples of investments in technology that have then that are then flipped over. And I would say, I guess the other side of it is where we've seen teams in data and AI that have always or have grown with kind of governance, ethics, regulation embedded within that team and have very strong relationships both with internal and external governance stakeholders. They're much better equipped to actually get things to market faster. You know, there's teams that could do quick POCs, but actually getting that into the real world is a challenge. So those that have actually invested upfront in governance have a much smoother path to market, I think.
And since your decentralized approach can kind of avoid many of these privacy pitfalls,
Yep.
Do you see decentralization as a bigger part of the future because of that, or is it just one piece of the puzzle?
It's a big part of the solution. We've got one of our advisors just joining the advisory board at the moment. It's a guy called Richard Witt, who was lead counsel at Google for 10 years. So he's setting up an organization called GlearNet, which is driving kind of growth through compliance, if you like. So basically, it's enabling organizations to sort compliance out by managing data participation with customers on the edge, right? So which is kind of part of what we do. For things like anti-fraud, you can run kind of AI on device to basically check someone's a real human. Some of our customers in the insights industry use that a lot because they've got apps that pay out cash, so they have big bot fraud issues. And we're also talking to big retailers where they're complaining that compliance team always shut down their projects, anything to do with data. There's a big concern around kind of risk for the business. By running everything out on the edge, you solve a lot of those problems because any data that comes off device is immediately consented, but you're doing all processing on the edge. So the GDPR, CCPA issues kind of disappear because you're doing everything in the customer's own domain before you then ask for consented data to come off the device. So it's massive, massive benefits for compliance.
I'm going to move on to the topic of how a business can build and invest in their data, recognizing it as maybe a core commodity, and how even to make it defensible. So this is open up to anyone that wants to take a swing, but everyone talks about data as the new moat, but few companies at this time, or maybe not enough, make their data more valuable over time. There's a certain sense of like, oh, we've got all this data. Can we invest in that? Can we increase the value of it? Can we protect it? Anyone have a perspective on that?
I think adjacent to the compliance point, and I mean, even though my dad was a lawyer, I did a law degree and a stats degree, and his dad was a lawyer, so I'm not supposed to hate.
It sounds like a tough upbringing.
It is. I'm supposed to, not be too mean to the compliance people. I think one of the benefits of having more complexity is I think if you're a smart person, you want to work on something difficult and you want to work in a space that's difficult because there's part of that complexity that I think sets the moat. On the data side, some of the best startups we see are just very ambitious from the get-go. So they set up the plumbing and the data engineering from the get-go. They think about entity resolution from the get-go because they're not thinking, how do we have a nice infrastructure when we get to Series A, but how do we get to nice infrastructure when we get to Series D? And I think especially now that you can build much faster, if you really get the direction and the people crystal clear, I think you can be much more ambitious from the beginning.
And I suppose of the companies you've worked with, what separate the ones that are taking the most advantage of this? Is there any attributes? You talked about the attributes earlier of like small startup companies versus the big incumbents. Of the small startup companies you work with, what really separates, or what skills or behaviors do they display that really allows them to grow the value of the data?
Companies where you have data people sort of embedded in the organization. So either you have a leadership team that actually has a bit of a data background, or you have software people that have also done data, or you have data people that really can put on a product hat, and that collaboration works much better. I think that's probably the biggest. And then there's just a huge piece around culture, because a lot of the investments in the plumbing, in the core pieces, whether it's consolidated place like HubSpot or whether entity resolution, it's never as urgent as some of the other things on the plate. But if you want to build a massive business, you just need to do them. So I think there's some companies that are like, we're too busy to do this stuff that's important. I think the best companies we see have a cultural DNA where they do all the right things from the beginning to actually scale to quite a big, to the next 2 rounds instead of just the next one.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot. I've been working in product in HubSpot for over 9 years, and I feel like the urgent always takes over from the important, but it's important that actually...
Especially in startups. The word data's got a bad rap, right? Because we think of data as kind of gray and it's statistics and it's numbers, but actually what it represents is your business, right? So if you look at your customer data or your operational data, that is a representation of everything that you are and the value you have as an organization. And your customer data is especially moving into a world of AI and agents, is the lifeblood of your organization. So in terms of data moats, I'd be very, very careful about shipping all of your data off to Sam Altman, who may end up competing in your vertical to try and get a return on his $1 trillion valuation.
HubSpot just announced MCP connector with OpenAI. I'll jot that down.
In terms of that deep understanding of who your customers are in context, you want to keep local. Lloyd's Banking Group have just announced personal AI, and they're running all of that on their own AI on-prem or in their own cloud, which kicks off in January 2026. So we're moving into a world of personal AI and agents. Think very carefully about where you're sending the data to. It's easy to ship everything off to OpenAI. I mean, we don't use OpenAI as a startup because there's a lot of intel that we have that we just don't want to share with OpenAI. So we basically run everything on our own cloud or use Claude, for example. So just being mindful about where the data is going to, because it is the value of your business is your data.
Do you think, I remember Scott Galloway made the point whenever he was on the board of New York Times that he feels the strategic mistakes that publishers made was making their data so easily and readily available to social platforms. Should we be learning from that? Is that social arguably was one of the last big waves? This is the next wave. Should we be?
There's a fascinating continuum there, right? For Google, it kind of made absolute sense because you drive traffic. For social, you ended up people reading kind of your articles in the social content, and then you had a kind of a breakdown of the value exchange. And now you're moving into an AI world. You're cutting off the funding effectively for publications, which is why you kind of got a push to basically cut off bots from kind of sending data back to the big cloud models. I think we're really early stage, though. It's like having one big steam engine at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and imagine there's going to be one AI to rule them all. And the reality, we've all got computers in our pockets. Basically, we're going to move very, very quickly to a completely distributed world. And then it's about kind of where your data estate is architected and where the data's flowing to.
Does this resonate with your experiences?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of the organizations that we're working with are obviously highly protective of their data. So they're very focused on keeping it secure either in their own on-premise environments or their own private cloud environments, and they're not shipping it out to third parties and shipping it out to the big LLM providers. I guess the approach that they tend to take is actually getting some of those LLMs and then having a private version hosted within their own infrastructure. So the data all sits inside their walls and it's not leaving externally. So I think definitely taking that more conservative approach in terms of sharing data with those providers.
We're kind of getting close to the last 10 minutes, and I've been warned not a second passed. So I want to make sure we land this plane with good timing. We're going to talk a little bit about future thinking and imagining what might happen next. But you've been on a lot of panels, a lot of conferences. I'm sure over the years you've heard and probably given a fair few hot takes. Which things have you got wrong in the last few years, or which things surprised you from your perspective?
One where I was wrong and one where I was right. Sadly, the one where I was wrong is very costly as a VC. When I first got my hands on the first version of Replit and Lovable and the first version of Claude Code, I was quite whelmed. I didn't really understand the LinkedIn hype. I was like, it just really produces plausible, mediocre code that is actually quite hard to then sense check. I think it's gone so much better, much faster than I would have anticipated. The second thing that I did anticipate, I think correctly, is that the data layer is hugely important, and enterprise is just so unbelievably slow to just sort it out. They're like still waiting for this magical AI agent to sort out their CRM. I'm like, the stuff you care about is not in your CRM. There's no culture of logging. There's no culture of piping things through. Like the core data assets you're trying to do are just in a really crap spot, and you can't like vault over that. You do need to get some of that infrastructure in place.
I like the way you had one that was right and one that was wrong. I think you've set a precedent for the other two. We're going to need a right and wrong.
I was going to say, I don't know if I got anything right. I'd say one that I got wrong, one thing I was expecting that I don't think has quite happened yet, is I was expecting much more of a kind of explosion of much more kind of domain-specific and sector-specific models for particular domains. We've kind of gone down this path where we've got a lot of investment in these kind of more generic LLMs that have really high utility across different sectors and across many use cases. But there's not that many examples where they've been really fine-tuned for these kind of specific purposes. You know, there's a few for sure. Things like, I mean, DeepMind and some of the work they're doing in the medical research space is a clear one. But yeah, I'm expecting more of that hopefully to come over the next kind of 6 to 12 months.
Okay, so something like this is my big startup kind of founder confession. So basically I had a company called Citizen.me, which was trying to give everyone their own personal AI. I mean, I had about 500,000 kind of monthly actives on the platform, and the realization, all of the inbound interest was coming from people like Verizon who wanted to license the tech for their vertical. So that kind of driving a generic personal AI on device, unless you have trillions of dollars to kind of drive distribution, the reality of the tech just wasn't there when we were doing that, but also it's driving into verticals. You've got brands who really deeply understand their customer in their context, and empowering those brands to empower their customers is basically the way we're going to kind of break through with that personal AI piece. So I want my grocery retailer to become a nutrition coach. I want my hotel chain to actually know when I turn up that I like a Japanese restaurant and there's one around the corner, and I've just come off a 12-hour flight or whatever, right? That kind of thing. I mean, this is all really possible now. And the thing that surprised me is how quickly everything's moving. I mean, agents are really, this year, really picked up. There's hallucination issues. You can put deterministic guardrails around. You can do that on device as well. 2026 is, I mean, I think we're going to see massive leaps forward in terms of what you can actually do as a brand.
And we'll look forward now. I think Europe has had more and more vibrancy around its startup space. You know, I saw Revolut was one of the top 10 private companies, and Synthesia is, news came out that they're going to keep going. They're going to, make it happen, and this is, I think, very exciting as someone based in Europe. What do you think will be the defining characteristics that separate winning AI companies from the rest?
As a VC, we would rather back, like, we're twice as happy if a company does 200x and 100x. For many founders, either way, they're walking away with, like, incomprehensible wealth. So one of the things that's exciting as a VC is, A, the amount of European founders that have huge ambitions, massive ambitions. And a second thing is just how many people want to build and found something. You know, I went to the London School of Economics for my master's. The only 2 career paths that were acceptable there were McKinsey or Goldman. And the rest is like, why are you even here? So when I wanted to go to tech, I wanted to go to Google, everyone like almost spat on me. They're like, how dare you?
And your dad wanted you to be a lawyer?
I know, it's just disappointments all around.
Yeah.
I gave a talk there recently in one of the Master Finance program. And like 25% wanted to work in tech or start their own business, and people were doing things on the side, and people were learning how to code. And just the amount of super high quality people in the entire ecosystem that want to build something, I think is amazing.
That's a fascinating change in a relatively short period of time. I remember the original book about Facebook talked about at that time in Harvard. Most people in Harvard wanted to create their own career, and that was kind of the ethos there, which certainly at that time, 20 years ago, or even less, wasn't as present, but it sounds like there's been a sea change.
Yeah, 100%.
It's, again, getting away from data and AI and actually focusing on customers and unmet customer needs. What are the jobs that customers need doing? I mean, I can go to 5 different big kind of, say, grocery retailers across the US, Europe, and the States, and the top 25 unmet customer needs are pretty much 20 are the same across all of them. We know what these unmet customer needs are in each vertical, and if you can double down on really focusing on the things that we can now unlock and now solve for, that's where the success is going to come through from. It's the utilization, the application, rather than kind of whether it's the latest AI or whatever. Right?
Chris?
Yeah, and I guess just a bit of another lens, thinking about what you said about European companies versus maybe the global market. I think we'll see a greater focus in Europe on some of the privacy, governance, ethics aspects, just given the legal and regulatory framework we have in Europe versus maybe in the States, as an example. And I think in the long term, that's going to set up those companies well, right? Unless we see some global trend towards deregulation of AI, which I think is unlikely. And then also, hopefully we continue to see some of the front runners in more of the open source and open weight space as well. I know Mistral have set a really strong precedent there. There's more coming out of China now in a similar vein, but hopefully we continue down that track to really support that low-cost kind of innovation across the ecosystem as well.
As you can see, we're down to our last 4 minutes. So down to your last words. If you could give founders and product leaders one piece of tactical advice on building their data moat, and it's starting from today, because I'm sure we've all made mistakes in the journey so far, I'm sure. What's the one piece of advice you would give to product leaders and founders?
I think the more tangible you can make a proposal, the easier it is for people to say yes to it or understand, is that exactly what you want? And I think these days with AI, you can create functional prototypes that are just really, really tangible and actually sort of work how you would want them to work just quite quickly. And the biggest pitfall, I think, now we can build so quickly and that the end destination can be so exciting, is that you just go the wrong way. So I think this is why I spend a lot more time making sure to do the gimmicky sounding monopoly thing to get all the stakeholders really aligned on what they want, and building ideally small prototypes of the 3 or 4 or 5 things they get to pick, to make sure that we're going full speed, but we're going in the right direction.
I think that's been a massive change of it. Companies used to talk about show and tell, and now it's much more just show.
Again, I'd say doubling down on those unmet customer, really deeply understanding your customer. And as marketers, we've ended up in a world where we have 5 customer personas and we fall in love with our customers. They don't exist. These personas are we've made them up on a whiteboard. We have data available so we can deeply understand what the unmet customer needs in specific moments, right? So serving me coupons when I'm walking into a store, which are deeply personalized on me and my behavior, my family's previous buying behavior and future diary for the week ahead. Those kind of things are now available, right? So those kind of deeply impactful kind of moments, if you can understand what those are, deeply understand your customers, that is the value of your data that you want to then put a moat around. So it's understanding that and going beyond human-centric to becoming human customer participatory.
Chris?
Yeah, I think I'd probably echo a lot of what StJohn said. I think don't start with the data moat. Start with the user needs, the user problems that you're actually looking to solve. I used to work at a bank, and it's easy to get excited about all this data. You've got access to, banks have got all of this payment data flowing between different people and companies, and they're like, this is a gold mine. This must be really useful for so many different purposes. We're going to package it up into dashboards. We're going to provide it to businesses. We're going to sell it as a data product, aggregated, all of that sort of stuff. And then they kind of realize, oh, there's not really a market for this. Why is that? And I think it's easy to get excited about the data you can see in front of you and not think enough about what are those kind of business problems that you're actually looking to solve. And once you've identified those, then come back to the data and what is the data that you uniquely have access to or can get access to that's going to allow you to create that competitive advantage aligned to those different user needs.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Thanks for all coming along to this session, but special thanks to our free guests. Really appreciated you taking the time to chat to us today, and we hope that this has been a good kickoff or thought process, and hopefully a conversation starter. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.